Greetings, traveler. Back in the day, NFTs were a huge point of discussion. They came, they went, and one of the big conversation points were how could we use them in video games? Today, I want to talk about a little bit of the history that I know for NFTs. I want to briefly address what the situation was back then and what I think were some negative points about them. And finally, I want to cover what I think are still some really interesting use cases for NFTs and how we could possibly use them in games. My name is Xanthos. I've been working in the games industry for over 14 years now. And back in 2020, I was invited to attend SEDEC, which is basically something like the Japanese GDC, to talk about to a group of game developers about specifically this topic, how we could use NFTs in games in a meaningful way. So, first of all, let's talk about the challenges of using NFTs, what some strange things were about them, and then I will talk about what I mentioned in that presentation in an easy and simple to convey form here. So basically, back in the day, NFTs were mainly used either to sell digital artwork or to own part of that artwork, or to make it possible to own a digital piece of technology and somehow claim ownership around this. Now, these things are very difficult to do, I thought, ever since I heard about the concept, since, well, what would be the meaning of having a digital or owning a digital piece of art? I could understand owning a physical piece of art because you can, if it's a painting, you can get the value of bringing it home, hanging it on the wall, observing it. If it's an expensive or famous piece of art, then people would always recognize it. If you have a gold statue in your house, it looks like a gold statue. If you have a Picasso, it's obviously a Picasso. It's not a printed out simple piece of paper. So, and of course it has the resale value, right? You could always sell it for what it is. But if it's a digital piece of artwork, and it can be copied 100% with basically zero effort. So I always thought that's a problematic part of this approach. The other part was being able to own something digital. So one of the things that were really popular back then was the first tweet by Jack Dorsey, who is the founder of Twitter. Obviously a historical point in the progress of the internet. But what does owning it mean exactly? A tweet that's already out there, what does owning it means? If I own a Ferrari, I can go and drive it and enjoy that. But what does owning a tweet mean? These things were very confusing for me. I couldn't immediately see the value, although of course other people could see the value, and that's why some people spend so much money on NFTs and on digital artwork like that. There was a time when NFTs were really considered for use in games, but that didn't seem to produce any super famous examples, at least none that endured time in a profound way. However, the content of the presentation I gave back then, I think still holds value today. I think the concepts I mentioned back then are still true today. So I'd like to mention it here and potentially get your feedback in the comments. So here we go. So in my view, NFTs hold some positive traits that could potentially be useful in video games. One is that they have this natural ability to remember all the transaction history that happened in their use. So if we think of this in terms of a sword in a game, then that sword perhaps is used by one player to fight vampires, and if it's a magic-based game, then that sword could potentially get some vampire-related powers after being used to kill, 100 vampires or 1,000 vampires or something. And then once it obtains these abilities, because it remembers its history, it can be traded to another player who can take it and use it in its already empowered form. And here you might be thinking, well, yes, of course, but that's nothing new. Games have been doing that for decades. And of course, you are correct. In fact, that is a theme that is true for this entire video. Nothing that NFTs do is unique in that sense. There's nothing that only NFTs can do, and it's impossible to replicate with any other type of technology. Of course, you can do it in many ways. I just think that because of all the work people have put into the technology of blockchain and NFTs, it is convenient to use them in this way. Although, of course, you can achieve the same results with other pieces of technology. It's just more convenient to have all these features rather all together in one place. So an item that remembers its history can then be traded to another player, trading being another strong point of NFTs. And then the next player uses that sword to kill, I don't know, elemental monsters. And then after killing 1,000 elemental monsters, the sword changes again to have abilities inspired from elemental monsters. And so on and so forth. And every time the item is traded, it retains its previous abilities, it remembers everything the previous owner did with the sword, and it can be enriched over time to become this amazing legendary item that is amazing, not because it was created to be very powerful, but because it became powerful through its very, very specific use throughout its owners. So this is an example I'll be coming back to, so this is just to set the base for it. So NFTs also are very good with digital contracts. So every time we think about trading, selling, owning, giving part of the price to different owners and so on, obviously the matter of contracts, legal contracts, is going to come into play. And again, it's not impossible to do otherwise. It's just that NFTs have already built, most permutations of them have very good built-in methods for forming these digital contracts, and it just makes it easier to use in a digital setting. Finally, there's a good part about them because they can be used inside of a game and outside of a game. So what do I mean by that? So as a digital asset, it's not meant to be used exactly in only one place. It can be programmed in such a way that inside a game it serves purpose A, but if you use it in a different setting, it serves purpose B. So for me, these are my favorite traits about NFTs. Of course, you could achieve the same things with other pieces of technology. It's just nice in my mind that you have all these things in one place. So as I mentioned before, having a digital artwork be an NFT, in my mind, was not the most valuable thing in the world. And of course, for other people that might be not so, but I just couldn't see the appeal immediately. But then I thought, well, let's think about it. If this piece of ones and zeros has a functional use somewhere, if it can be used to do something that you wouldn't be able to do otherwise, then we're talking about something that has a use, namely as a game item. So of course, having a unique artwork is good and all, but if the same sword, for example, that has the artwork of the sword can be used in-game to be equipped and kill monsters with, then that is a functional way to use this digital asset. And measured by its ability to perform its function, you could perhaps go about setting its price as well. So if it's a weak sword, it's very cheap. If it's a super duper powerful sword, it's very expensive. So that's one way I would see NFTs having a realistic use in games. Now here you might be wondering, of course, that's very obvious. Many games try to do that. Nothing big or memorable came out of that. So perhaps that's the case, but as far as I know, most games that employed this tactic were not really popular games in their own accord. Most of the examples I have seen personally, and I really hope I'm wrong in this, were games that had a very, very simple gameplay, almost too simple for my personal taste, and they advertised the fact that they use NFTs, but they never really said what's cool about using NFTs in the games. They just said, hey, we are an MMO, by the way, we use NFTs. I know I'm oversimplifying here, but this is what it looked like to me uh, seeing games that used NFT back in the day. So I always thought that if the game itself was of good quality and people were playing it regardless of the NFTs, then adding NFTs in the game and using them in a meaningful way would make so much more sense. But if it's a game that was put together just to advertise its NFT technology, then it wouldn't be something that would be appealing so much to me personally, at least. So how could we push the usefulness of NFTs in games, and how could we gain from them in a way that's not just useful inside the game but outside of the game as well? Well, since they're made to be used and traded and they're made to exist in various digital settings, there's no reason why they should only be used in a game. Perhaps they can be used as something like concert tickets or event tickets at the same time, and vice versa, right? Let's say you buy a ticket for a digital event or a physical event in the real world, and that event gives you the ticket as a digital asset that you perhaps download to your phone and you can show at the entrance to gain access to the event. The same thing, the same digital asset could then be used to provide a benefit in the game. So if it's a multiplayer event or it's a tournament of the game or something, and you pay to attend it and you receive this item, this NFT that acts as your ticket, then the same item could be used in the game to be a special event sword that is offered as thanks from the developers for participating in that event. And of course it can be used as an item in the game at the same time. So one NFT has this multifunctionality of purpose in the game and purpose outside of the game. And finally, there is the aspect of the art that I mentioned before. So to me, it made no sense to own 1/32 of a not really amazing piece of art as it existed back in the day. But when I asked myself, well, let's say that there was a piece of art that I would like to own and somehow it was unique, right? What would that look like? And what can we do because this is an NFT and it's not a real artwork? Well, I thought, well, sticking with the sword example, let's say that the sword starts as a simple white, very standard type of sword. The artwork is also of a simple sword as well. But then as you use it, it gains all these extra abilities and it becomes different looking over time. So if it gains vampire powers, I don't know, maybe it drips blood every once in a while, or it has this dark red aura. Or if it gains elemental powers, then maybe it can also have flames around it or lightning crackling around it. And here we're talking not just about the appearance inside the game in 3D when you're using it, but also the item portrait as well. So the item portrait would be changing over time based on the abilities of the sword. And that aspect was very exciting for me. So when you buy a painting of a famous painter, it is valuable because it's one of the few copies that the painter made. The same is not necessarily true in the game, because you can, in a digital setting rather, because the same piece of art could be replicated an infinite amount of times for zero cost, basically. But if this artwork represents this unique item that has a unique history and unique looks based on its usage history and in this point in time, then that would be a completely different conversation altogether. Now, the important thing here is that because this artwork exists in a digital setting, it can keep changing, while a real life artwork would not change typically over time. It would be valuable because it is exactly as the painter said it. So having this ever evolving, ever changing asset is basically something like living art. So it has value for being an ever-changing, unique artwork. It has value for being useful in the game as a game item, and it can also act as a ticket of sorts to special events or gatherings, concerts, and so on, both inside and outside of the game. That's the beauty of having all these things supported by this one digital asset. And then, of course, if you choose to trade it, then all that infrastructure of how it can be traded, how much it can be traded for, if the price is fractioned between owners, who would get what, and so on. All that, of course, it can be done through other means, but it's just convenient that all this functionality is built into NFTs. So, as a final note on the artwork here, questions I received during that presentation was, well, the artwork idea is good and all, but how would that work in practice? So I can imagine how a sword would get different abilities the more it's used, but how would you make an item that keeps changing its art basically forever? So for this, what I have in mind was using some sort of procedural graphics generation technology to put the rules for the change of the artwork inside the asset from the moment of its creation, and say that when these conditions are fulfilled, the artwork changes like so. When the sword unlocks this ability, then this part is added to the artwork. And through that if-then type of structure, then we can imagine how the game designers could put all the rules necessary for all the possible permutations of the sword inside the rules of the game right from the beginning, even if they never touched again until the end of the game service. These rules could be there forever. And of course, it's also possible to change this over time, since NFTs can still allow you to modify them in later versions, especially if you can customize it like you want for the game. So by attaching these rules to the item and by having them secretly be coded into each one of these NFT swords, this creates another exciting part for the players, because they know that this sword looks very plain and very simple looking in the beginning, but they wouldn't know what sort of action triggers what sort of ability, or like unlocks what sort of power. So that's another exciting thing for players to discover and to experience as they're playing the game. They can exchange stories like, I used it in the forest and this happened, and then I used it in the mountains and this happened, and then I sold it to my cousin and my cousin did this with it, and that's what the sword did for him. And this item keeps changing and keeps evolving, and its legend keeps growing and growing and growing. And if somebody was to give a name to the sword, then that would make a lot of sense, because it would be really a unique item. There would be no other item like that out there that had this exact usage history, these same owners that did these exact actions. This is where remembering all the history of the item really comes in handy, even if the item changes owners. And in my mind, this at least would make for a pretty cool and unique item in any game. Anyway, these are my thoughts on the topic. I know that NFTs are getting a lot of negative reputation because of the way they were used before. I don't think that this is unwarranted. We did see some very negative examples, but at the same time, I think that it's still an interesting piece of technology if it can be used in a positive way, if it makes sense in the game, if it makes the player's experience in the game better, if all this trading has a reason to happen besides the I'm just trading it for money aspect of it, and it's just fun to do and it makes sense in the game world, then perhaps that's something that would be fun to interact with in a game in the future. Anyway, these are my thoughts. I know this is a super controversial topic. I'm really looking forward to hearing what you think about this, traveler. And as always, thank you so much for your time and have fun.